The deepest wounds are not always caused by the people who leave, but by the promises they refuse to keep when someone needs them the most. A cold February morning settled over St. Matthew Medical Center in downtown Chicago as sunlight filtered softly through the hospital windows, filling the maternity ward with a quiet warmth that contrasted sharply with the uncertainty inside room 214. Brianna Lewis lay exhausted in her hospital bed, her newborn son sleeping peacefully in the bassinet beside her. Every few minutes, she reached over just to touch his tiny hand, as though reassuring herself that he was truly there. Despite the sleepless night and the physical exhaustion of childbirth, her eyes reflected something stronger than fatigue. They held the fierce determination of a mother who already knew her greatest responsibility had only just begun. A gentle knock interrupted the silence before the door slowly opened. Marcus Hill stepped inside wearing an expensive tailored coat, his expression carefully controlled but emotionally distant. He offered only a brief glance toward the sleeping baby before turning his attention to Brianna. Neither of them smiled. Too many difficult conversations had already taken place during the months leading up to that morning. Brianna quietly greeted him and motioned toward the bassinet. "Would you like to meet your son?" Marcus hesitated for a moment before walking closer. He looked down at the baby without saying a word. The child stretched slightly beneath the blanket before settling back into peaceful sleep, completely unaware of the decision that was about to shape the beginning of his life. A hospital administrator entered carrying several folders and greeted them politely before placing one document on the small table beside the bed. "Congratulations," she said with a warm smile. "We only need both parents to complete the birth certificate paperwork before we finish today's discharge process." Brianna reached for the pen with trembling fingers, signed her portion, and gently slid the document toward Marcus. The room became strangely quiet. Marcus stared at the paper for several long seconds before picking up the pen. Brianna watched with cautious hope, believing this would finally be the moment he accepted responsibility. Instead, Marcus slowly placed the pen back onto the table without writing a single letter. "I cannot do this," he said calmly. Brianna looked at him in disbelief. "Marcus," she whispered, "he is your son." Marcus avoided looking at either her or the baby. "My life has changed," he answered quietly. "I have a future that cannot survive this becoming public. I am engaged now. My career is finally moving forward. If I sign this document, everything I have built could disappear." The words settled heavily throughout the room. Brianna lowered her eyes, gently wrapped both hands around her sleeping son, and said nothing more. She refused to argue in front of her child, even if he was too young to understand. The administrator respectfully collected the unsigned paperwork and quietly stepped outside, leaving the painful silence behind. At that same moment, several floors below, Vincent Romano entered the hospital through the main lobby, carrying flowers for an elderly family friend recovering from heart surgery. As he crossed the hallway near the maternity department, he noticed the hospital administrator standing outside room 214, speaking softly with a nurse whose expression reflected quiet concern. Neither woman realized Vincent overheard a single sentence that immediately drew his attention. "I have never seen a father refuse to sign so quickly after his baby was born." Vincent instinctively glanced toward the partially open doorway. Inside, he saw a young black maid gently rocking her newborn, while the empty chair beside her slowly reminded everyone in the room that sometimes abandonment did not begin with someone walking away. Sometimes it began with a signature that was never written. Late that afternoon, the maternity ward slowly settled into its familiar rhythm as nurses quietly prepared new mothers for discharge. Wheelchairs rolled gently through polished hallways, and families celebrated new beginnings with flowers, balloons, and joyful photographs. Inside room 214, however, the atmosphere remained painfully different. Brianna Lewis carefully dressed. Her newborn son in a soft blue blanket, she had folded herself weeks before his birth, taking extra time to button every tiny sleeve as though every gentle movement helped replace the comfort someone else had chosen not to provide. She never allowed tears to fall while looking at her baby. Whenever emotion threatened to overwhelm her, she simply smiled at him instead. A nurse entered carrying the final discharge paperwork and explained each document with quiet kindness before hesitating over the birth certificate. The space reserved for the father's signature remained blank. Brianna looked at the empty line for only a moment before calmly signing the remaining forms. "It will just be the two of us," she whispered to Noah with a tenderness that carried both heartbreak and determination. An hour later, she stepped into the hospital lobby, pushing a small bassinet with one hand while balancing two worn travel bags over her shoulder. There were no grandparents waiting with flowers, no excited relatives taking photographs, and no partner opening the front door for her. Families reunited all around her while she quietly walked toward the exit alone. Across the lobby, Vincent Romano had just finished visiting his elderly family friend and was speaking with the hospital administrator when he noticed the same young mother from room 214 carefully adjusting the baby's blanket before stopping near the curb. Snowflakes drifted gently through the February air as she searched her purse for a bus pass instead of calling for a taxi. The administrator noticed Vincent watching and quietly sighed. "She refused every offer to delay discharge," she said softly. "She insisted she could manage." Vincent asked nothing further, but his eyes remained on Brianna. She stood in the cold holding her newborn close beneath her winter coat, while patiently waiting for the city bus like thousands of ordinary people did every day. When the bus finally arrived, another passenger immediately stood to help lift her bags aboard, while Brianna thanked the stranger with genuine gratitude. She never complained, never looked back toward the hospital, and never searched the crowd hoping Marcus might suddenly appear. She accepted reality with quiet dignity and focused only on protecting the tiny life sleeping peacefully against her chest. Vincent watched until the bus disappeared into afternoon traffic before leaving for his own office downtown. Yet the image refused to leave his thoughts. He had spent years surrounded by people who demanded respect because of wealth, influence, or family names. But the young woman he had just witnessed possessed something entirely different. She carried herself with a quiet strength that asked nothing from anyone while giving everything she had to her child. That evening, as Brianna unlocked the door to her modest one-bedroom apartment on the west side of Chicago, she carefully placed Noah's bassinet beside the only window in the living room before unpacking the few belongings she had brought home from the hospital. The apartment was small but spotless. Baby clothes had been folded with care into inexpensive storage bins. Handwritten notes reminding herself of feeding schedules were taped beside the refrigerator, and a second-hand rocking chair waited near the window where afternoon sunlight would eventually warm the room. Brianna looked around her simple home, kissed Noah gently on the forehead, and quietly promised, "You will always know that you were wanted." At almost the same moment, several miles away, Vincent found himself staring out the window of his office overlooking the Chicago skyline. Unable to explain why a single unsigned line on a birth certificate suddenly felt heavier than every contract he had signed throughout his entire career. Barely 6 weeks after bringing Noah home, Brianna Lewis returned to work because the bills waiting inside her small apartment could not be postponed simply because her heart wished for more time with her son. Every morning before sunrise, she bundled Noah carefully into a second-hand stroller, wrapped him in the warmest blanket she owned, and caught the city bus toward Romano Grand Hotel, one of the finest luxury hotels in downtown Chicago. The hotel management allowed employees with infants to use a modest child care room during shifts, a benefit Brianna treasured more than words could express. She arrived early every day, greeted the front desk staff with a genuine smile, checked on Noah one last time, and quietly tied on her housekeeping uniform before beginning another long day. Few guests ever noticed the woman carefully making their beds, polishing marble bathrooms, replacing fresh towels, and leaving every room looking untouched by the lives that had briefly passed through it. Brianna never rushed her work because she believed every task reflected her character, not merely her paycheck. Even after sleepless nights spent feeding Noah every few hours, she continued moving through each hallway with calm determination, always thanking coworkers who offered even the smallest kindness. During lunch breaks, she rarely joined larger conversations, choosing instead to spend every available minute in the childcare room, holding Noah close, softly reading picture books borrowed from the public library, even though he was still too young to understand the stories. She believed hearing her voice mattered just as much as understanding the words. Several floors above, Vincent Romano attended a quarterly operations meeting with hotel executives, reviewing guest satisfaction reports and employee performance. Normally, he focused only on business results. But one afternoon as the meeting ended, he noticed a housekeeper kneeling beside an elderly guest whose cane had accidentally slipped onto the carpet. Before anyone else reacted, Brianna gently picked it up, made certain the gentleman was comfortable, and asked whether he needed assistance reaching the elevator. She smiled with sincere respect, not because cameras were nearby or supervisors were watching, but because helping someone simply came naturally to her. Vincent recognized her immediately as the young mother from St. Matthew Medical Center. Curious but careful not to interfere, he quietly asked the hotel manager about her after the guest had safely departed. "That is Brianna Lewis," the manager replied. "She has only been with us a little over a year, but everyone trusts her. She volunteers for extra shifts whenever someone becomes sick, never complains, and somehow still finds time to encourage the newest employees. She had her baby not long ago, yet she has not asked for special treatment even once." Vincent listened without responding, remembering the empty signature line on Noah's birth certificate and the lonely bus ride home from the hospital. Later that afternoon, he happened to pass the childcare room on his way to inspect another department. Through the small observation window, he saw Brianna sitting on the floor during her break, with Noah resting happily in her lap. She was smiling as she pointed toward colorful pictures inside a worn-board book, celebrating every tiny sound Noah made as though he had delivered an important speech. When the end of her break arrived, she kissed his forehead, whispered that she would be back soon, and reluctantly returned to work with the same composed expression she carried every day. Vincent remained standing outside the room for several quiet moments before continuing down the hallway, slowly realizing that the greatest strength he had witnessed in years did not belong to someone surrounded by power or wealth, but to a young black maid who refused to let disappointment define the future she was building for her son. As winter slowly gave way to the first signs of spring, Noah grew from a sleepy newborn into a bright, curious baby whose wide eyes seemed eager to discover every corner of the world around him. Brianna noticed every small milestone with quiet joy. She celebrated his first laugh, his first attempt to reach for a toy, and the way he smiled whenever he recognized her voice after a long shift. Those moments became the reward that carried her through endless days of work and countless nights with little sleep. At Romano Grand Hotel, Noah gradually became a familiar face in the employee child care room. The caregivers adored his cheerful personality because he rarely cried and seemed fascinated by everyone he met. Whenever Brianna finished cleaning another floor and visited during her break, Noah greeted her with excited little sounds that instantly erased the exhaustion from her face. Vincent Romano happened to witness these reunions more than once while making routine inspections throughout the property. He noticed something unusual that many others overlooked. Brianna never spent her breaks checking her phone, complaining about work, or resting alone. Every available minute belonged entirely to her son. She would sit on the carpet beside him, stacking colorful blocks, reading simple picture books, or gently encouraging him as he practiced sitting upright without support. Her attention never drifted elsewhere. One afternoon, while walking through the hotel lobby after meeting with investors, Vincent observed another small moment that lingered in his thoughts long after it ended. An elderly maintenance employee named Harold accidentally dropped a small box filled with replacement light bulbs near the service entrance. Several people hurried past without noticing, focused on their own schedules. Before Harold could bend down, Brianna quietly rushed over, carefully gathered each unbroken bulb, and placed them back into the box. At the same moment, Noah, sitting in his stroller beside her, watched everything with wide, attentive eyes. Brianna smiled warmly at Harold and said, "Everyone needs a little help sometimes." Harold thanked her with genuine appreciation before continuing on his way. As Brianna adjusted Noah's blanket and prepared to return to work, she gently looked into his eyes and softly added, "That is how we take care of people, sweetheart." She spoke naturally, never realizing someone nearby had heard every word. Vincent remained standing several feet away, pretending to review messages on his phone while quietly reflecting on what he had witnessed. The lesson had been simple, almost ordinary, yet it carried a sincerity that money could never purchase. Brianna was not teaching Noah through expensive schools, impressive speeches, or grand gestures. She was shaping his character one ordinary moment at a time, believing that kindness practiced daily would eventually become part of who he was. Later that evening, after the hotel had grown quieter, Vincent requested a copy of Brianna's employee file from Human Resources. Everything about her reflected consistency. Excellent performance reviews. Perfect attendance whenever possible. Volunteering. For difficult assignments. No disciplinary reports. No complaints against coworkers. She had quietly built a reputation for reliability without ever seeking recognition. Vincent closed the file and leaned back in his chair, realizing that the strongest people were often the ones the world noticed the least. Outside his office window, the lights of downtown Chicago shimmered against the evening sky, but his thoughts remained fixed on a young black maid whose greatest achievement was not simply surviving hardship, but raising a child who would one day learn that true strength was measured not by what a person possessed, but by how gently they treated others even when life had given them every reason to become bitter. Nearly a year passed, and Noah grew into a cheerful toddler whose bright smile seemed to soften every room he entered. His first steps had become confident little walks, and his favorite place in the entire hotel was the child care room, where he greeted every caregiver with the same joyful enthusiasm. Brianna continued balancing motherhood and long workdays with remarkable grace, never allowing her own exhaustion to diminish the warmth she gave her son. Every evening after finishing her shift, she carried Noah onto the city bus, and together they returned to their small apartment where simple routines became treasured traditions. They shared homemade dinners at a tiny kitchen table, read library books until Noah grew sleepy, and ended each night with Brianna quietly reminding him that kindness was something a person practiced every single day. One Saturday morning, the hotel hosted a community volunteer event in partnership with a neighborhood family resource center. Employees were invited to participate with their children, assembling care packages filled with diapers, baby formula, blankets, books, and basic necessities for struggling parents. Brianna happily volunteered, believing that helping other families was worth giving up one of her few days off. Noah wandered beside her carrying a small paper bag that was almost as large as he was, proudly placing children's books into each donation box with careful concentration. Vincent Romano attended the event as well, greeting community leaders and thanking volunteers for their efforts. While speaking with organizers, he noticed Noah quietly studying another little boy sitting alone near the entrance. The child looked about the same age but wore a worried expression while holding a worn stuffed rabbit whose ear had been carefully stitched together several times. Noah looked down at the colorful toy car someone had just given him as a thank you gift for volunteering. He admired it for only a few seconds before walking toward the unfamiliar child without hesitation. Brianna watched silently from several feet away, but did not interrupt. Noah gently offered the toy car with both hands. The little boy looked surprised and slowly accepted it. His face brightened almost instantly. One of the volunteers smiled and asked Noah, "Are you sure you want to give away your new toy?" Noah looked up at Brianna first, then answered in the simple language only a small child could use. "Mama says if somebody is sad and I can help, then the toy will be happier there." The adults nearby exchanged quiet glances, touched by the innocence of his words. Brianna knelt beside her son, wrapped an arm around his shoulders, and kissed the top of his head. "I am very proud of you," she whispered softly. "The things we share never really leave us. They grow inside someone else's heart." Standing several yards away, Vincent heard every word. He realized Noah had not been born with generosity. It had been patiently planted, watered, and nurtured every single day by a mother who possessed very little, yet somehow always found something to give. Later that afternoon, after the event ended, Vincent asked one of his trusted attorneys to quietly investigate Marcus Hill. The report arrived within days and confirmed what Vincent had begun to suspect. There had never been any question about Noah's paternity. Marcus had privately acknowledged the child months before the birth. He had refused to sign the birth certificate for only one reason. He feared that public responsibility would damage his engagement to the daughter of a wealthy business executive and slow the career he had spent years trying to build. Vincent closed the report slowly, disappointed not by the legal facts, but by the realization that one man had abandoned his own child to protect an image while another person's greatest wealth had come from teaching that child how to care for strangers. Vincent Romano did not sleep well the night he finished reading the investigative report. The facts were simple, but they lingered in his mind with unusual weight. Marcus Hill had acknowledged privately that Noah was his son, yet he had willingly abandoned every legal responsibility because he feared losing social status and professional opportunities. Vincent had negotiated billion-dollar agreements, settled complicated business disputes, and spent years making difficult decisions. But this was different. For the first time in many years, he found himself wondering how many people quietly carried impossible burdens simply because someone else had chosen convenience over responsibility. The following Monday morning, he walked into the executive boardroom of Romano Grand Hotel with a new agenda that surprised every department head. Instead of beginning with occupancy rates and financial projections, he introduced a comprehensive employee family support initiative. Paid parental leave would be expanded for both mothers and fathers. The Employee Child Care Center would receive additional funding, longer operating hours, and updated educational resources. A new emergency assistance fund would help workers facing unexpected family hardships. Legal consultations would also become available free of charge for employees dealing with custody, guardianship, or birth documentation issues. The executives exchanged curious looks, impressed by the generosity, but unaware of what had inspired such sweeping changes. Vincent offered only one explanation. A strong company is built by strong families. If we ignore the people carrying the greatest burdens, then we are failing the very people who make this place successful. The proposal received unanimous approval before the meeting ended. Throughout the following weeks, the improvements quietly transformed daily life inside the hotel. Employees who had once struggled to arrange childcare could now work with greater peace of mind. New parents no longer feared choosing between caring for a newborn and protecting their income. Several workers facing legal challenges accepted confidential assistance they otherwise could never have afforded. Brianna noticed the changes just like everyone else, but she assumed the company had simply decided to invest more in its employees. She thanked her supervisor for the improved childcare schedule, grateful that she could spend a little more time with Noah before and after each shift. She never imagined that the quiet man she occasionally passed in the lobby had personally ordered every new policy. Vincent intentionally avoided any recognition. Whenever reports describing the program's success reached his office, he read them privately and filed them away without public celebration. One afternoon, he happened to walk past the childcare room again and saw Noah laughing with several other toddlers while Brianna knelt beside them, helping each child stack colorful wooden blocks into small towers. When one tower collapsed, the children looked disappointed for only a second before Brianna smiled and said, "Sometimes the best things are built twice because the second time we already know what makes them stronger." The children happily began building again. Vincent quietly continued down the hallway carrying those words with him. He realized Brianna approached life exactly the same way. Every setback had become another opportunity to rebuild instead of surrender. Every disappointment had strengthened rather than hardened her heart. Looking through the lobby windows at families coming and going beneath the bright Chicago afternoon sky, Vincent understood that real leadership was not measured by the size of a business empire or the influence of a respected name. It was measured by whether the people whose lives intersected with yours were given a fair chance to stand a little taller after you entered their story, even if they never discovered who had quietly opened the door for them. Several months later, an unexpected letter arrived at Brianna Lewis's apartment from the Cook County Family Court, informing her that a formal hearing had been scheduled regarding Noah's birth records and legal parental responsibilities. She read the notice twice before quietly placing it on the kitchen table beside Noah's crayons. Although she had never pursued conflict with Marcus, one of the attorneys volunteering through the hotel's new employee legal assistance program had encouraged her to secure Noah's future by establishing complete legal documentation. Brianna agreed for one reason alone. She wanted her son to grow up with every protection the law could provide, whether or not anyone else chose to stand beside him. On the morning of the hearing, she dressed Noah in a neatly pressed navy sweater, packed his favorite picture book into a small backpack, and entered the courthouse with calm determination. The volunteer attorney greeted her warmly and assured her that everything would proceed respectfully. Across the waiting area, Marcus arrived wearing an expensive suit, accompanied by his private attorney. He appeared confident, avoiding eye contact with Brianna while speaking quietly about protecting his professional reputation. Noah, unaware of the tension surrounding him, sat happily beside his mother, turning the pages of his picture book and occasionally pointing at colorful animals with delighted laughter that echoed softly through the hallway. When the hearing began, the judge carefully reviewed the existing records before asking Marcus whether he wished to acknowledge legal responsibility as Noah's father. The courtroom remained silent while everyone waited for his answer. Marcus slowly stood and calmly replied that recognizing the child would create serious complications for his current family plans and professional obligations. He admitted that he had always known Noah was his biological son, yet insisted he preferred to remain uninvolved. His words carried no anger, only a quiet selfishness that seemed even more painful because it was spoken so matter-of-factly. Brianna closed her eyes briefly but refused to respond emotionally. She simply rested one comforting hand on Noah's shoulder while listening with quiet dignity. Before the judge continued, another attorney respectfully requested permission to address the court on behalf of an interested party. The judge nodded, and moments later Vincent Romano entered the courtroom. Several people immediately recognized him, surprised to see one of Chicago's most respected business leaders attending what appeared to be an ordinary family proceeding. Vincent walked calmly toward the front, greeted the judge respectfully, and explained that although he shared no biological connection with the child, he had authorized legal counsel to ensure Noah's rights would never be limited by another adult's personal ambitions. He stated that every child deserved legal protection, educational opportunity, and the security of knowing that society would not punish them for decisions they never made. He further confirmed that he had established a private trust dedicated exclusively to Noah's future education and well-being, regardless of how the legal determination ultimately concluded. The courtroom fell completely silent. Even Marcus lowered his eyes, unable to meet the steady composure of the man standing only a few feet away. Vincent never criticized him, never raised his voice, and never attempted to embarrass anyone. Instead, he quietly looked toward Noah, who smiled innocently without understanding the significance of the moment. Then Vincent turned back toward the judge and spoke words that lingered throughout the room long after they were finished. Children should never have to earn the responsibility that adults freely choose to abandon. If one person refuses to stand beside this little boy, then let today remind us that character is revealed by those who willingly step forward, not by those who quietly step away. When the hearing concluded, the judge formally recorded the legal findings and ensured that every protection available under the law would be secured for Noah's future. Although Marcus remained Noah's biological father, he chose not to assume an active role in the child's life, and the court carefully documented his decision along with the responsibilities that would continue to exist under state law. As people quietly gathered their belongings, Marcus paused near the courtroom door and glanced once toward Brianna. For the first time, the confidence he had carried into the building seemed to disappear. He looked at Noah sitting peacefully beside his mother, then lowered his eyes without speaking another word before walking away. Brianna did not watch him leave. Her attention never left her son, who was happily turning the pages of his favorite picture book as though the weight of the morning had never touched him. Outside the courthouse, the cool Chicago breeze carried the first hints of autumn through the city streets. Brianna thanked the volunteer attorney who had represented her before preparing to take Noah home. Before she reached the sidewalk, Vincent Romano quietly approached. There were no reporters, no photographers, and no audience waiting to witness the conversation. It was simply two people standing beneath a clear afternoon sky, while Noah pointed excitedly at a flock of pigeons gathering across the plaza. Brianna looked at Vincent with sincere gratitude, but struggled to find the right words. "I never knew," she said softly. "The childcare program, the legal assistance, the family support at the hotel, that was all because of you." Vincent smiled gently and shook his head. "No," he answered. "It happened because someone reminded me what responsibility truly looks like." Brianna looked confused, and Vincent continued. "The first day I saw you, I thought I was witnessing a young mother being abandoned. I was wrong. What I was really seeing was someone refusing to abandon her child, no matter how difficult life became." Brianna felt tears gathering in her eyes, but this time they came without sadness. They came from finally realizing that someone had seen her years of quiet sacrifice without reducing her to a victim. Vincent looked toward Noah, who was now laughing as he carefully offered pieces of a cookie to a small bird standing nearby. "You never needed anyone to rescue you," Vincent said. "You only deserve the same fair opportunity that every hard-working parent deserves. Everything else, you earned yourself." Brianna took a slow breath before answering. "Most people only noticed what I did not have. You were the first person who noticed what my son already had." Vincent followed her gaze toward Noah. The little boy had no understanding of courtrooms, legal documents, or complicated adult decisions. He only knew that sharing his cookie made another living creature a little happier. Vincent smiled quietly, recognizing the same lesson Brianna had been teaching since Noah was born. Wealth could purchase comfort, influence could open doors, and success could earn admiration. But none of those things could replace the values patiently planted inside a child's heart by a loving parent. As Brianna thanked Vincent one final time and began pushing Noah's stroller toward the nearby bus stop, Vincent remained standing on the courthouse steps, watching them disappear into the afternoon crowd. For the second time in his life, he saw Brianna walking away instead of toward him, but unlike the lonely day she left the hospital, she no longer carried uncertainty alone. She carried the quiet confidence that dignity, once recognized, could never again be taken away. 1 year later, the changes that began with a single unsigned line on a birth certificate had quietly transformed far more lives than anyone could have imagined. Romano Grand Hotel had become known throughout Chicago not only for exceptional service, but also for treating its employees with genuine respect. The expanded family support programs introduced by Vincent Romano had become a model that several other businesses chose to follow, proving that compassion and professional excellence could grow side by side. Brianna Lewis had recently been promoted to housekeeping supervisor after consistently demonstrating leadership, patience, and unwavering dedication. The promotion came with a larger paycheck, predictable hours, and enough stability that she and Noah were finally able to move into a bright 2-bedroom apartment only a few blocks from a neighborhood park. Every evening after work, they walked there together, where Noah, now a lively preschooler, spent hours laughing with other children while Brianna watched with quiet gratitude from a nearby bench. One Saturday afternoon, the hotel organized a community celebration, honoring employees whose commitment had positively influenced both the workplace and the surrounding neighborhoods. Families filled the ballroom with cheerful conversation, children proudly displayed artwork they had created, and local organizations shared stories about programs that had been funded through the Employee Assistance Initiative. Brianna had no idea she would be recognized during the event. When her name was announced, she looked around in surprise before slowly walking to the stage as warm applause filled the room. Vincent stood beside the podium and waited until the applause faded before speaking. He never mentioned the courtroom, the investigation, or the difficult decisions that had led everyone to that moment. Instead, he simply said, "Leadership does not always begin with a title. Sometimes it begins with a parent who chooses hope instead of bitterness, responsibility instead of excuses, and kindness instead of resentment." Brianna Lewis reminded this company what quiet strength truly looks like. The audience rose to its feet in a standing ovation while Brianna struggled to hold back grateful tears. Looking toward the front row, she saw Noah smiling proudly and clapping harder than anyone else in the room. After the ceremony ended, children gathered around tables covered with books, puzzles, and art supplies. While adults continued talking nearby, a little girl accidentally dropped an entire box of colored pencils across the floor. Before anyone could react, Noah immediately knelt beside her and began picking up every pencil one by one. He smiled as he carefully placed them back into the box before handing it to her with both hands. The little girl thanked him with a wide smile, and together they returned to coloring as though nothing unusual had happened. Brianna quietly watched the simple exchange, recognizing the same lesson she had repeated to him since the day he came home from the hospital. Vincent witnessed it as well from across the ballroom. At that moment, he understood that the greatest investment he had ever made was not measured in dollars, buildings, or business success. It had begun the day he chose to protect a child's future. Instead of ignoring another person's hardship, watching Noah laugh freely among friends, Vincent realized that true legacy was never about the name written on a birth certificate. It was about the character written into a child's heart by those who chose responsibility when it mattered most. And as the evening came to a peaceful close beneath the warm lights of the ballroom, everyone present unknowingly became part of a story that proved dignity could survive disappointment, compassion could change generations, and the strongest families were often built not by perfect beginnings, but by people who refused to stop choosing love every single day.